Hello everyone and welcome to a new Sega Mega Drive and Genesis game development tutorial. In this lesson I'm going to be teaching everyone how to take assets from other games, for example background graphics, and import them into the Mega Drive using SGDK. Now there are lots of things to consider here, the colours and whether it fits in FreeRAM or not. Obviously if you're taking some kind of image from a Mega Drive game itself, then that should be fine because it obviously works on the system. Anything from the Master System NES will be fine too, be very easy to do. When we get to games, to consoles such as maybe the Super Nintendo or especially the 32-bit consoles, we're going to have some color issues that we need to sort out because obviously the color palette is different and the number of colors supported is not as much too. So I'm going to teach you how to overcome them and how to get it working on the Mega Drive in the best way possible. Using assets from some of your favorite games to experiment a bit with programming Mega Drive games is a fun and convenient way to learn, but first of all we need to know where to find these assets. While you can rip the assets from the games yourself, for example by using an emulator on the PC and then taking screenshots of the sprites you want to put into your game, thankfully for many of the more popular games they've already been ripped and uploaded by other people already. And for example this website is called Spriter's Resource, is a very good one I've found if you want to look for any background graphics and also sprite graphics for games for many different systems, including the Mega Drive itself and the Super Nintendo, PlayStation, etc. I will leave a link to this site in the video description, but of course you can also just do an internet search for any game you want to find assets for, and either this site or some other site should show up. I'm not sure how many of you recognise the Super Nintendo game playing at the very beginning of the video, but I'm sure everyone recognises this game here. This is of course from Zelda: A Link to the Past. I thought this would be a nice little example to use today to see how we convert these graphics to use in the Mega Drive, and just with the person who ripped them is called Namayu. He says no credit needed, but we'll give them credit nonetheless. I really like the art style of this. I think it's a very colourful game. It still looks good all these years later, and I especially like the trees and the little villages and the lakes. I think it's got a very appealing art style, and if you look at it from this kind of bird's eye view, it doesn't actually look too big, but I'm sure for those who, especially for those of you who played this as kids, it seemed like a huge world and a big adventure at the time. Now we're in A Sprite at the moment, and if you press M you can bring up this highlighted section, and what we're going to do is we're going to copy this forest section here as an example. So if you Control C you can copy, and then Control N to open a new file, and we're going to keep the color as RGB. We don't want to make this index right now, and we want to leave the background as black. And if you look at the top where it says width and height, actually because we've already copied it using Control C, it's going to automatically create a file the same size of what we copied. If we just Control V now, then we'll get the map in a new file. Okay, so that's great. So we've got a little section of the forest here, and one of the first things we're going to do is we want to make sure that we've copied it correctly. So remember the both Super Nintendo games and Mega Drive games, pretty much all the games from the consoles of this era, they worked on a tile-based system, and normally the smallest tile was 8x8 pixels. So we just want to make sure that what we've copied, that the map is a multiple of 8 pixels, both in the horizontal and vertical spheres. So easy way to do this is go to the bottom right hand corner to the final grid and just see if that's 8x8 pixels, and if it is then we've got it right. If you press C here you can adjust the size of the map, and of course if you see something like this, and it's obviously wrong, but so long as both the height and the width is a multiple of 8, then it should go into the Mega Drive okay. The next thing we want to do is just to check that all the tiles are actually lined up correctly. So remember, with even though the Super Nintendo was a more recent system, it came up a couple of years after the Mega Drive, it had more VRAM, but of course all those systems at the time didn't have too much VRAM, especially compared to today, so they had to save on that by using lots of tiles, identical tiles throughout the whole one here. So if you check here we can see that the tiles are pretty much lined up correctly. There's lots of repeated tiles, especially you can see it most obviously in the trees here, lots of ones which are flipped horizontally and vertically, and they do that to save VRAM, and I suppose it saves the artist time too. And obviously we've got these other tiles here which is just plain green for the grass, so obviously they're all they're all duplicated tiles, and even with these little bushes here, you can see we've got 4 tiles making up the bush. The top 2 are the same, they're just flipped horizontally, as are the bottom 2, they're flipped horizontally too. So I think it's pretty obvious in this example that everything's lined up correctly. The grid, the 8x8 grids line up perfectly. If it looks a bit askew, then you're going to have to change that, but it looks like we've copied it successfully here. When we're putting together maps, and especially when we're doing the collision detection one day, we're normally going to do it in squares of 16 by 16 pixels. So I'm just changing the grid to 16 by 16 here. If you look at the palette on the left hand side, it doesn't seem to bear any relation to what we're seeing on the map. The map is mostly these browns and greens, whereas the palette we've got on the left hand side here, it seems to be just these random colours. I think everyone watching this knows that the Super Nintendo can display more colours on screen at the same time than the Mega Drive can, as well as having a larger overall colour palette. So what we're going to do next, we need to find out how many colours are in this map here and what colours they are. So it's going to be a real moment of truth to see how difficult this conversion is going to be. The way we're going to do this is going to the palette bar options on the left hand side and select new palette from sprite. Now don't worry, the fact this is not a sprite, it's a background, it doesn't matter. And now we simply click OK, and it's going to take all the colours from the map and put them on the left hand side in the palette. So luckily enough, it looks like it's only 17 colours, so that's not so bad at all. While of course we can use more than one 16 colour palette for the background for the Mega Drive, I think since we've only got 17 colours here, I think we can maybe get rid of one of the colours and then reduce that to 16 and just have this on one single background using one single palette. To start off with, we're going to go up to the top here to sprite and then color mode and choose index. So now instead of RGB, this is now index. So that means it's almost like those color books where the each color is given its own number from 1 to 17 in this case, and each colors represent each pixel on the map has a number, and whatever number corresponds to whichever color, that's what color it puts into it. Just to make that extra clear, if we were to have kept that palette we had at the very beginning and then went to index color mode, you can see the result is like this. It tries, the A-Sprite will try to use the palette we have to fill in the colors in the map, and the result is pretty interesting, but of course we're going for a look closer to the original game. So let's go back to our previous screen. Okay, so we have to delete one of the colors to make it fit into our 16 color palette, and I'm going to teach you a little trick how to do this. So if we're going to add another color here, this bright pink. Now the reason for doing this is we want to try and look at the different shades of green and brown we have in our palette and see which one is the least important, which one is used the least. So as I said before, each color is given a number, then that corresponds to a number in a pixel number in the map itself, and whatever number's there, that's the color it's going to use. So if we Control C and copy this pink, and for example copy over this green here, we can see that that number was number 17, and all the pixels number 17 in the map will now be changed from that green to this pink. And you can see that this green in particular is not used too much in the map, just in that. We can do the same here, we can color this pink. Again, it's another part of that. I'm not sure what that kind of object is, if it's a type of flower, I'm not sure. And if we paste it over this brown here, we can see where this brown is used on the map a lot more clearly. We can do the same for all of the different browns in the green. Now this brown in particular, if we change this to pink, we can see it's only used in this little dirt patch here, so this might be a good candidate to delete. This brown here, of course, is used in a lot of different things, so we probably want to keep that one. Okay, so I think this little brown in this little patch of dirt is probably the best candidate for a color to delete. And when I say delete, it's just going to delete the color from the palette, and then A-Sprite's going to choose an alternative color that's maybe closer. So if we delete it now, it looks a bit strange, everything, because everything's shifted because all the numbers are jumbled up now. In order to fix this, we're going to choose the remap palette button here. So if we choose this, it's basically telling A-Sprite to have it as close to it as it was before as possible. And what it's going to do, where this previous brown was, where we've now deleted it, it's going to choose another brown from the palette as a substitute. So I think it's done a pretty good job here. If I undo and redo, the shade of brown is just very slightly different. It's not a big difference. I think it still looks nice. If we use the Alt button and left click, we can choose what brown it's using, and if we enter the pink into here again, we can see the Aseprite has substituted the brown on the tree trunks for the brown we used before. So now it's not only used for the tree trunks, it's also used for this little bit in the dirt, a little rock too. So now we have our 16 colors plus the pink, so we can delete the pink here, and that's not going to make any difference. We can remap palette anyway, but as I said, it hasn't changed yet because it was the final color on the index, and it wasn't using it in the map at all, so we deleted that, and that's fine now. So we've got our 16 colors. I should note at this point that although we're down to 16 colors, which should fit fine in one of our 16 color Mega Drive palettes, the actual colors in that palette we have right now, they're not from the Mega Drive palette, but from the Super Nintendo palettes. Now, the particular shades of green and brown in the Super Nintendo palette that we have here might not necessarily exist in the Mega Drive's palette, but we can take we could call it the lazy option, and we can actually upload this graphic to SGDK now, and what it will do is it will try its best to choose the closest Mega Drive color from the Mega Drive palette to substitute for these Super Nintendo palettes. Now sometimes you get a good result and sometimes you get a bad result, so let's give it a try and see what result we get here. First of all, we're going to have to save our file that we've just created here. Make sure the color mode is in indexed, and make sure we've already checked there's a multiple of 8, the horizontal and vertical size, and we're going to make it a PNG file and just call it whatever you want. So I can call it the Zelda Forest or the MD version of the Zelda Forest and so on, and then click OK. And to test out quickly in SGDK, we can go to the lesson we studied previously, the how to display large maps. Simply copy our new Zelda Forest file into that. Click on rename so we can copy the name. And what we're going to do is we're simply going to rename the resource here. So before we uploaded this large green hill and the Sonic background, but this time we're going to replace it. So click on replace, and if you push return 3 times, it replaces it with the Zelda Forest, and we can make sure you save that resources.res file. As for the main.c, we can pretty much leave this the same, but just remember when we did the previous lesson with the Sonic the Green Hill Zone, we had to scroll on the y-axis down 768, so we just delete that and put 0, because we don't need to go down that far to see, because we've just seen the sky in the Sonic example, but here we can just put that as 0, and if we just save and compile and display, we should see our Zelda Forest up and running. And considering how little time we took to put this together, I think it doesn't look too bad at all, especially as we got very lazy and we put in we didn't change the palette to the Mega Drive palette, we just put in the Super Nintendo palette basically for those 16 colors, but it looks like SGDK has done a pretty good job of approximating the closest Mega Drive colors for that one. The Gens emulator isn't too great when it comes to reproducing the true colors of the Mega Drive, so you can look at Kega Fusion here, which tends to be a bit more accurate, and I've tried this on my Mega Drive itself and it doesn't look too bad at all. However, this method can be a bit risky because sometimes the SGDK will make some not very optimal choices in terms of colors, and to show you how this works, I'm going to give you this example here from my early days doing the Castlevania Symphony of the Night game for the Mega Drive. You can see it. I created this background in 16 colors, so I got rid of a lot of the colors. Obviously the clouds still look very bad here, but I was quite happy with the walls. I thought, okay, the clouds need to be replaced with completely new clouds, but the walls can stay and they're looking pretty good. Unfortunately, when I actually coded the background in SGDK and loaded it on my Mega Drive, the result wasn't so great. As you can see here, apart from the horrible looking clouds, it's the wall that really disappointed me, because there's lots of detail missing from the brickwork in the middle, and what's happened is, whereas this brickwork, you've got this like nice, slightly lighter grey colour, when I've loaded into SGDK using these 16 colors from the PlayStation palette, it's decided to use the same color, the Mega Drive palette color, for both these light grey ones as well as the darker grey around it. So as a result, we lose this detail, we lose this color. It's using one Mega Drive color for these two colors in the palette, these two grey colors, so we've lost that detail. So you have to be very careful with this method. It's normally best to actually choose the individual colors from the Mega Drive palette before you put it into SGDK. Although our little Zelda forest background seemed to turn out okay, I'm just going to take the opportunity now to teach you the more thorough method. So we go back to our background here, we can do Control A, then Control C, and then we're going to create Control N to create a new file, and then paste again, Control V to paste, and we have this new file here. And if we drag it to the right hand side, we can do it so we have two windows open at the same time. On the left hand side we have the one we just did where we've used it to 16 colors, and we've made a copy of that on the right hand side. Now the difference is on the left hand side we still have this as a indexed color, and on the right hand side we're going to keep it as RGB for now. And on the right hand side we're going to load in the Mega Drive palette, the 512 colors of the Mega Drive palette. So now we have that Mega Drive palette loaded onto the file on the right hand side, our new one, but because it's still in RGB, it hasn't affected the colors in the map because they're not linked together, because we haven't put it in index mode yet. If you remember at the beginning of the lesson, we had that funky palette from before and we just changed it to index mode and it automatically changed the colors. We can do the same here with our Mega Drive palette. So it's going to do its best to fit the Mega Drive palette, and if we do new palette from Sprite, we can see how many colors it's going to be using. And this is going to reveal a problem, because when we do this, we can see that there's 4 colors which have gone missing. So it's now only using 12 colors, and if you look very closely you see some details missing. For example, the grass used to have 2 tones of grass on the up level of the grass, but now it's just one single tone. So this method of doing it like this is not really a good one, because just like when you import stuff into SGDK without changing the palette, if you do the same here too, and you just ask Aseprite to automatically do the palette for you, it's going to maybe take some shortcuts and the effect isn't going to be as good as you hoped. Also, if we go back to the second, if I just undo the last thing we did when we got the colors from the map, and we go back to the 512 colors but still in index mode, we can see that this doesn't work very well either. So we've got 512 colors, and the first 256 colors of the palette are okay, they're as they should be. But if you go down to the other second half, for example this white color here, it turns out as a yellow, because the second half, if you change to index mode straight away, the second half of the 512 palette, it's going to be different colors than you expect. It mixes them up, and the effect isn't as you want. So we never, when we have the 512 colors, we never switch to index mode straight away. We have to use it as RGB mode, and then afterwards, once we cut our colors down to 16 or 31 or however many, then we can finally go to index color mode. Okay, so after discussing how not to do it, what's the proper way of doing this so you get the colors right in your Mega Drive version? Well, it's easy. Keep it in the RGB mode and simply start selecting, you can press B to get the brush and start selecting some different colors, and just try and match up the colors from the Mega Drive palette with what's on the original Super Nintendo color palettes. Or of course, if you want to be creative, you can choose a different color scheme. But if you see here where I'm trying different types of green, the colors that are in the Super Nintendo palettes, they're not necessarily exist in the Mega Drive one. We've got lots of different shades of green, but they're all slightly different from the original, so you're probably not going to get an exact match. So it's really up to you to use your creativity and your own judgment to decide which greens and which browns and so on is most suitable for the grass, for the trees, for the different tones in the trees and so on. I'm sure you can tell while watching me trying out different greens that I'm not the best artist, and of course if you are artistically trained, I'm sure you understand a lot more about color theory and how obviously you can't just take one single color in isolation. How it appears is affected by which colors you surround it with, and if you press the G button you can access a shortcut for this like bucket mode, so you can put lots of green or any other color immediately over a large area, and some of the greens look a bit too luminous, I think, like it's been a nuclear war or something, and others feel a lot more suitable. I think this one looks quite nice, but of course it's a very subjective thing whether you think it looks good or not. Once we have the grass to where we think maybe it looks okay, we can start on the trees too. So the trees have these, looks like 2 different shades of green, and just like with the grass, the Mega Drive doesn't have an exact match for the Super Nintendo green that it uses there, so you have to be a bit creative and choose one and start to mix them together, see how they look when they're compared against when they're contrasted against the grass and all the other colors you're going to have too. Here I think I'm using the same green for the grass and for this extra shade in the trees too, which is not really what we want. I mean, it does reduce colors that way, but you can probably select different ones for the trees as for the grass. So the Mega Drive isn't that restricted in colors, so we should try and make it as colorful as we can. And I think the green, the lighter green shade in the trees here is still a bit too bright. I don't think it looks that great at the moment. If I just skip ahead a bit here and go to the point where I think I've got the colors roughly where I want them, what would be the next step? How can we get our colors from this little testing project here on the right hand side and get the Mega Drive colors transferred over to our the one on the left hand side, which is Index, and which only has the 16 colors. So what we have to do is hold the Alt button on the keyboard, then left click the color you want to change, then it will find the one in the palette for you. You can Control C on that palette on the left there, and now we need to switch over to the one on the left hand side, our other one with the 16 colors, and simply hold the Alt button and left click the color you want to change in the map. It will then highlight the associated palette. Then we can Control V and we can click on that, and then voila, it will change the color in the whole map there. We can now do the same for the other color. So again, Alt, then left click, and then it will highlight the palette. We can Control C, copy that palette, Alt and left click on the place we want to change in the map. It will tell you what palette that is, what color in the palette that is, and then Control V again, and we do the same with the grass now too. We've only done that for the 3 colors of the 16 color palette so far, so at the moment some parts look a bit weird because the contrast is a bit off, and you just continue to do this over and over again. So the next ones you might want to start doing some of the browns. Now although the Mega Drive has quite a lot of greens in the palette, it doesn't seem to have quite so many browns. So I think especially this Zelda game, it uses quite lots of different shades of brown, so I think this one's going to be a bit more difficult to find a brown that matches quite closely to how it appears in the original. And of course it also has to contrast nice with our new colors too. So you see me here experimenting with the different types of browns. Some of them look a bit too reddish, some of them look a bit too yellowish, and so it's quite difficult to find one that's quite similar to the one that appears in the Super Nintendo. One thing you can do is actually change the size of the color palette here, the on the left hand side, and if you just drag it, you can see that it'll go into different patterns, and some patterns might be more useful for gathering colors of a certain hue together, and so you can play about with that. And of course in the future maybe you can even change the palette around yourself a bit, so that maybe the greys stay all together in one place, and the reds in one place, the browns in one place, the greens in one place, and so on, just whatever's convenient with you. I carried on with this for a few more minutes and changed some of the browns and so on. So I think half of it I changed to the Mega Drive palette, half I just left as the Super Nintendo palette and hoped for the best. And then I put it into SGDK. I created a little ROM, and you can see especially the trees look a lot truer. What appears in Aseprite now and what appears on the emulator is much more similar than it was before. So if you do that for all 16, you take a lot of time. I'm sure you can get it looking really good, and hopefully a lot better than I got it looking here. That little forest section actually wasn't too much of a challenge, because it did start with 17 colors after all, and we just had to take away one color and then start to transfer the Mega Drive palette into those remaining 16 colors. So let's go ahead and let's choose a bit more of a challenging part where we might have to use more than one palette. So if we take this village part here, I think this village part looks very nice. We can press the M button and then simply highlight the part we want to copy. So we're going to copy this whole village area here, and then once we get it to the to where we want to copy, thankfully it's been nicely demarcated into areas. We can Control C, then we can Control N to create a new one. Again, leave it as RGB and leave the size as it is and leave it as black and so on. If we click OK, then Control V, we will have this in our new file. Here we have some water, we have the trees, we have the tiles here too, and you know, the pavement that people walk on. We have all different kinds of bushes, we have different colors of houses, so I think it's going to be a bit more difficult. So just checking sure that we make sure we copied it okay, so everything lines up correctly, the tiles are all correct and everything looks fine. If you look here in the, what do you call this, like the welcoming wooden thing, then it all lines up perfectly, the trees, the little jars and everything. So obviously the way we've copied it is all fine, and next we're gonna have to see how many colors it is. So this is going to be the moment of truth. So if we do it like last time, we do new palette from Sprite, then click OK and see how many colors we have, and it's a lot more than before. So instead of having to contend with 17 colors, we now have 41. Now I think we could reduce this to 16 colors, but I think we'll lose a bit too much coloring detail. With most backgrounds we can normally use 2 palettes, so it'd be 16 palette for the PAL 0, 16 colors in the PAL 0 palette, and then in the second palette, PAL 1, we can use 15 of those colors because one color is going to be a transparent object. So in total we'd have 31 colors to do this, so we have to reduce it from 41 to 31. At this early stage we can just have a quick look over the scenery and see what colors we can use. So for example, the water has these 2 colors in it, a darker blue and a lighter blue, and so does the cottage, but they're slightly different shades of dark and light blue. But I think we can use the same dark and light blue for both the roof of the cottage as well as the water, and I don't think it'll make a great deal of difference. Right now I'm going to copy that little the cottage with the blue roof, and we're going to have 2 different tile sets with 2 different palettes. So one of them is going to be the PAL 0 tile set and palette, and I'm going to create that now. So again, highlight the blue cottage bit, we're going to include the shadow and the grass as well. We're going to copy this, and again we can Control C, Control N, then Control V, and we're going to start with our PAL 0 tile set. Next I'm going to press the C button, and then you can change the size of it because we're going to put quite a lot of different tiles on here, so we need a lot more. We can make it super big for now, and of course it can be reduced later, so I'm going to add 320 pixels to the right and to the bottom. So this is where we're going to put all the tiles, which are going to use the PAL 0 palette of 16 colors, and of course later on we can create another file with the ones that are going to use the PAL 1 palette. So we're just going to see how many colors are in this cottage. So it's 10 colors, so we got an extra 6 colors left over that we can also add to the palette. Now let's also add the water that we was looking at before, so we can again copy and paste that into our tile set there, and then we can again make it count how many different colors are in the palette. Since this is going to be our tile set, I just want to be careful that everything's lined up correctly in terms of the 8x8 pixels, or 16x16 is fine too. So I'm just going to move it there. The cottage is already fine. I'm just going to make sure these water tiles line up with our 8x8 tile pixels too. If we now update the colors in the palette, we should have a few more. So okay, so that's added quite a few more colors, and we've got 2 more left now. We've got 14 colors, and we've got 2 more left until we reach the 16. As I said before, some of these blues we use in the roof of the cottage could be used for the water too, so we have potential to reduce there. But first of all, let's add a few more. So I think we've already got 1 building with the blue roof, and since the red buildings with the blue roofs also use the same kind of brown, so it's just I think it's just the roof that's different, we can also add that. So let's do that now. Let's add the red cottage as well, and then see how many extra colors that adds. I think it may be another 2 or 3. So now we really are at 16 colors, but we can still add some more things. As I said before, we're going to reduce the colors anyway. So just as with the blue ones, with the blue water and the blue roof, we're going to look for other colors which are similar to the red we used in that the cottage with the red roof, and these jars are an obvious candidate. So let's copy those over too and see if maybe they're either using the same red or they're using a very slightly different red. And we also have these trees too, so I think these trees are definitely more of a pink rather than a red color, but maybe we could use the same kind of reddish pink for these two and further reduce the colors that way. Now it's time to see how many colors are in our palette now. So we've got quite a bit more, so we're 7 over at the moment, so we're gonna have to reduce 7 colors from this, and I think it's possible. I said by changing these blues, I think we can certainly do that. The first step to reducing the colors is first to change the color type to index rather than RGB, and now we can start take away colors. So I think the first way to start is definitely on these blues which appear in the water as well as the cottage. So I think we're going to use like the dark part of the cottage, the roof there, as the dark color in the blue, and we're going to make sure that the light part of the roof is the same as the light part of the water. So we can simply delete the color and then remap the palette, and hopefully Aseprite will be intelligent enough to choose the same one. So it looks like we can do here, I'm doing Alt and left clicking, and it's using the same dark color in both now. We can do the same with this light color too, and hopefully it will be sensible enough to choose the same color for both, because it's the obvious choice, and it looks like it has. So I think both the water and the roof still look okay, and that's fine. We have this little color here too, and we can do the little pink trick, because I think this little color I've just highlighted now, it only appears in that small section, so we can just do the little pink trick I talked before just to see if that's the case. So if we look now, we can see that little piece of blue just appears there, so that's a candidate. Maybe we can just delete that altogether, substitute it for a different color. For example, we can use light blue here instead, or we can, it's just a very small detail, so we can delete that detail entirely. In terms of the details, for example, in the woodwork for the cottages, that looks very beautiful, so I wouldn't want to do that. And we can check here that the reds too, so it looks like the red for the jar and the roof of the cottages are already using the same red. However, I'm pretty sure that the tree is using a different kind of a pinkish red rather than the same one, so I think we can try to use the same colors there and see how the tree looks. And I think it looks pretty good. So if we shift the palette again, we're going to see how many colors we have, and you can see by sharing the blues between the water and the roof, and sharing the reds between the tree and what was with the jar and with the red cottage, we've reduced the colors by a few, and I think it still looks nice. It still looks colorful, and I don't think we lose too much, and these are the kind of sacrifices you need to make, but I think they're relatively small ones. I think there's still some room to save some colors on the brown colors, because I think the browns used on the tree trunk are different from the ones used on the walls of the cottages, and I definitely don't want to lose any of the detail in the cottages because I think it's very beautiful. It looks like this carved wood, and the same in the tree trunks too, but I think we can use some of the same brown colors and it won't make too much of a difference. After consolidating some of the browns and even a couple of more colors and adding a few more items from the map, I ended up with a palette of 14 colors, and I think everything still looks really nice. So even with the extra signs and the posts and so on, and even some trees as well. Now, since I've got this down to 14 colors and we had 2 left over, we could just reintroduce maybe the pink colors to the tree, but I had another idea. So we already have like a blue cottage and a red cottage, so I wanted to add another color, because that would make it almost seem like this Mega Drive version of the Zelda village has even more colors than the Super Nintendo one, even though of course that wouldn't be the case, but we can at least add some more obvious color differences, which makes it look more colorful even though it isn't. So I'm just going to open a separate sheet here, loading the Mega Drive palette, and I want to do a yellow roof. So I'm trying out all these different yellow colors. I want a subtle yellow color rather than a too much of a bright yellow color, almost to like the straw houses that lots of the maybe houses in cottages in the countryside of England have, these straw roofs, and so they appear kind of a yellow color, but it can't be too much of a bright yellow, of course. So let's do that and see how it goes. And I think the result is pretty nice with that yellow cottage. So we have the 3 color cottages, one more than the Super Nintendo, and we have a tree in there too. We have some signs, some fences, some jars, and all using only 16 colors. So I think we've done quite a good job there. Now, apart from the 2 yellow colors I just added that I took directly from the Mega Drive palette, of course the rest of the colors here are using the Super Nintendo palette. So if you want to do it properly, you have to repeat the process I discussed earlier, where we transfer, we kind of copy over the Mega Drive substitutes from the Mega Drive palette for these blues and greens and reds as well. At the moment it's just the kind of yellowy orange two colors which are using the Mega Drive palette, and then once we've got enough in that palette, we'd add the second palette, so that'd be PAL 1, which can have 15 colors, and I think it'd be good to maybe add all the pavement, which is like a light green there, and so on. And in the meantime we can start adding more browns and greens tiles to our current palette. We will use both palettes when we come to do the lesson on how to use multiple palettes within a single background, but for now I'm just putting that PAL 0 palette we created and just put it into SGDK and just see how it looks in the emulator, and I think it's looking quite nice. You got some weird tiles there where it reaches the end of the map we created, but everything looks, I think, great. I don't think we've lost too much detail. It looks pretty colourful, and then this is the 16 colours, and of course eventually we can create a map that uses both this palette and also the other palette, so we have a total of 31 colours. We had 15 more colours, and of course all the other tiles too, and we'd eventually, in that lesson, we'll use both palettes and both tile sets to create our own Zelda village. We've talked a lot about colour today, but of course another thing you have to be careful of when importing graphics from other systems is the amount of VRAM they use. So for most Super Nintendo games I think we're okay, and as you can see here, the little example we created is using only a tiny amount of VRAM. We actually have lots of space for these sprites and so on, because after all, the new Super Nintendo, those days they need to keep it's not just how much VRAM you have, it's how big a ROM you're willing to have, and the ROM was quite expensive, the cartridges, so they want to keep the ROM size down. And even for this little forest area here, we're using a tiny bit of VRAM. We have so much space for all sprites and so on. So for Zelda at least, it looks like VRAM wouldn't be a problem for the Mega Drive. Now, when you're dealing with games from 32-bit systems, such as the PlayStation, it's not just the colours, but of course the VRAM becomes much more of a challenge, especially for games such as Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which I'm doing at the moment. The VRAM is definitely something to consider. And before we leave, let's have a look at this part of Castlevania Symphony of the Night to look at the colour situation too, because it's a lot more difficult to convert the graphics from this game than it is for the Zelda game we just did. I think this part from the Royal Chapel in particular is going to be very difficult. You can see the sheer number of colours it has. It wasn't just reducing from 41 colours as we had with the Zelda example just now, but reducing from a very large palette. And what makes it even more difficult is the type of colours in this palette. So you can see these very kind of realistic and subtle greys and greens and browns, which as we've seen, the Mega Drive doesn't really have too many of. And there's so many different like shades of these colours, and it's going to be so difficult, so much intricate brickwork, and to reduce the colours, as we probably will have to do for this scene here, down to 31 from what it is now, which is probably around 200, is definitely much more difficult. It's a huge challenge, and there might also be some issues with the VRAM too, because there's lots of unique tiles in terms of the paintings and the stained glass windows and all the little intricate details that make this game such a beautiful game. But we've dealt with these challenges before with the previous levels, and it's good that we got someone like Pyron on board who's an expert at this kind of thing. But I hope it makes you appreciate his work even more now, because it's a very difficult thing to reduce all these colours. Just before I finish the lesson, I just want to talk a bit more about the colours, more specifically the grayscale of the Mega Drive. Now, I've just got this 8x8 tile here, and you can see that the palette now, as it is on the side, it's almost split up into these 64 colour squares. And so there's actually an easy way to organise it to see all the different grey colours you have. So if you start in the top left and then go diagonally down per square, you can get all the grey colours out of the Mega Drive. So we go diagonally down 2 squares and now 3 squares, and if we keep on doing this, we will get all the greys in the Mega Drive. So since there's not so many, so it really doesn't have as much compared to, say, especially the PlayStation, and of course Castlevania Symphony of the Night uses lots of these kind of very grey colours, but the Mega Drive does have grey colours, and someone emailed me very helpfully to point this out and just to show me how to do this. So for those of you who are interested in doing more kind of different grey colours, you can see it does have a grayscale, and I'm sure you can organise it so you do different ones for, you know, the greens and the blues and so on, and it might be a good way to organise your colours. Okay, so I think that just about wraps things up for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in this kind of content, then please subscribe to the channel.
I'm interested in this.
And if you want to support the channel further, I have a Patreon account.
You won't go unrewarded.
And until next time,
farewell.